Hey guys, tonight we're going to brave the freezing gusts that claw at your coat as you trudge through the remote, windswept villages of Iceland, places where the past doesn't lie buried but rattles softly through drafty turf homes and over salt-stung cliffs. You hear it in every howl of the wind, every creaking board underfoot, the forgotten stories of men and women accused of dark arts, punished not always by fire, but by ice, isolation, and rumor. You'll wander through places with names you probably can't pronounce unless you've eaten 3 bowls of skyr and summoned the spirit of a Norse poet. And as the wind rushes past, you'll get the strange feeling that something is watching. No, not your ex stalking your Instagram, something much older, wilder. A raven, maybe. Or the chill breath of justice meted out with bone-carved knives and seawater trials. There's a good chance you wouldn't survive one of these trials, but don't worry, we've made it cozy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you watching from? What time is it there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take your first steps into Skagastr, a sleepy little harbor town tucked beneath steep hills and battered constantly by wind that feels personal, like it's trying to push you back into the sea. The fishing boats moan at their moorings, and wooden homes lean into one another like gossiping aunties. You might notice the air smells like salt, smoke, and something slightly fermented. Maybe despair. Maybe just cod. In the early 1600s, this very village was the scene of something darker than fish tales. Here, among cliffs so steep even sheep walk sideways, locals whispered about NTTRA, the unnatural. Not just bad luck, but the sort of strange misfortunes that couldn't be blamed on weather or poor harvest. A calf born with 2 heads. A fisherman who woke up speaking Danish. The kind of stuff that made people quietly clutch their runes and cast suspicious glances toward the neighbors who never came to church. You walk past a restored turf chapel where one of Iceland's earliest recorded witch trials took place. The priest at the time, J.N. Magnusson, wasn't your typical man of God. He believed wholeheartedly in invisible enemies. His sermons often included accusations. Imagine sitting in church and hearing, "And may Thorvald be smitten for hexing my knees." He accused his own parishioners of witchcraft, especially 2 brothers he believed had cursed him into chronic pain and insomnia. Historians still argue whether J.N. truly suffered from delusions or used the trials to mask personal vendettas. The accused didn't stand much of a chance. Iceland's trials didn't usually include dramatic fire pits or public burnings like in mainland Europe. Instead, the punishment was more administrative: exile, imprisonment, or beheading. Yep, decapitation was disturbingly common, especially for men. Iceland convicted and executed a higher ratio of male witches than any other European country. So much for patriarchy. Quirky detail time: some accused witches in Skagastr allegedly used wind magic scrolls, little parchments smeared with sheep's blood and seaweed ink, meant to summon favorable weather or redirect storms. Sailors tucked them into boots or stitched them inside hats. You imagine that now, brushing dust off a moss-covered stone near the old fish drying rack. And you get the sense that maybe, just maybe, you shouldn't have touched it. You duck into the local museum, modest, full of carved driftwood and faded trial transcripts written in spidery Icelandic script. There's a horned seal skin said to belong to a shape-shifter. The curator doesn't confirm or deny. She just smiles and offers you smoked herring. And then there's the infamous wind stone, carved into the cliffside above town. Legend says it was inscribed by an accused witch on the night before his beheading. The symbols seem random to outsiders: 2 spirals, a jagged rune, and what could be a fish or a falling star. Locals believe it controls the wind. Sometimes, kids sneak up and chalk in their names, hoping to summon a breeze for summer kite festivals. Sometimes, the wind screams for days after. You linger there now, coat wrapped tightly, watching waves batter the shore as the gulls circle overhead like airborne judges. The sky rolls in gray cotton, and somewhere behind you, a window slams shut. You don't turn around. You edge further down the coast, boots crunching over frost-hardened seaweed until you reach a bluff where cliffs huddle like gossiping elders and the sea below snarls with a mood that clearly hasn't had its coffee yet. Skagastrendi fades behind you, replaced by the moan of gulls and the low hum of wind slipping between jagged stones, a sound that begins to feel less natural and more like a warning whispered through cracked lips. This place is called KV Slarfi Whisper Ridge, and you can already sense why. The wind here doesn't just blow, it converses. You hear snatches of words that might be Icelandic, might be your own name, or might just be your imagination performing circus tricks to stay warm. Either way, it's unsettling. Beneath your feet lie the remains of a sagging hut, long abandoned, its turf roof caved in like a tired sigh, letting daylight pierce the gloom in slivers that look suspiciously like runes. The air smells like damp wool and something more ancient like regret. This ruined shelter once belonged to Run Lafster, one of the region's earliest recorded female witchcraft suspects. She was no bubbling cauldron type. Run was a healer, respected but also feared, which is never a good combo in a village prone to paranoia and sheep-based politics. When a baby died unexpectedly after Run treated its fever with sea moss tea and whispered charms, the whispers turned accusatory. Unnatural knowledge, muttered the neighbors. And just like that, she was brought in for questioning. Now, Iceland didn't go full Salem with flaming stakes and dramatic hats, but Run's trial was still brutal in its chill simplicity. Her spiritual testing involved 9 nights of forced isolation inside a sealed shed, lit only by rancid whale oil and filled with the cold breath of her own thoughts. Historians still argue whether the practice was meant to summon repentance or hallucinations. Either way, it was designed to break her. But Run didn't break. She vanished. Some say she walked inland through a snowstorm and found refuge in Akureyri. Others claim she transformed into a puffin, flew west, and now patrols the cliffs. You won't see proof of either theory today, but that puffin you spotted earlier did look at you funny. Quirky detail time, the village kids still dare one another to sleep on Whisper Ridge. Not because of ghosts, but because the local legend says that if the wind speaks your name and you don't leave immediately, you'll be cursed with lifelong flatulence. Yes, really. That's probably why the local dating scene has a no-win jokes rule. You descend from the bluff, the ridge behind you like a watching eye, and reach the shoreline where ancient symbols are etched into flat stone circles, arrows, and what might be a poem or might be a grocery list from 1624. One stone seems oddly fresh. You fight the urge to touch it, mostly because your survival instincts aren't on vacation. This is the one-versed stone, said to be inscribed by a fisherman who disappeared while summoning good weather through verse. His boat was later found adrift with dry nets and folded sails, but no sign of him. Historians still argue whether his rune poem was genuine say or magic or just the last words of a man who spent too much time with cod. You turn and spot a seal offshore, bobbing silently in the waves, staring like it's holding a clipboard. Is it judging you? Is it a reincarnated priest? The jury's still out. You wave. It doesn't wave back. Classic seal behavior. Behind you, the cliffs lean slightly east, as if trying to migrate toward Denmark. Maybe that's where the trial records went. Maybe they're just tired of the cold. You follow the curve of the coastline where basalt teeth jut out from the surf like nature's version of a bad mood, and the wind begins whispering in more deliberate tones, not just gusts now, but murmurs, as if old voices are riding shotgun. Ahead, a cluster of sea-warped cottages slump toward the earth, their windows shuttered with age and maybe secrets. You slip through a fence that's barely a suggestion anymore and find yourself in front of a strange stone marker. It looks like a gravestone, but etched not with names, but with runes so angular they might slice your fingertips if you stare too hard. You don't touch it, obviously, because you remember last night's dream involved a goat speaking Latin and some things are just signs. This site is known for its association with avian messengers, ravens, specifically. Icelandic folklore revered ravens as divine couriers, watching over the righteous and tattling on the wicked. In this village, trial testimonies include bizarre details like the raven landed 3 times on her roof, and he spoke to the bird and it answered. You roll your eyes, gently, because let's be real, most birds would rather poop on your porch than deliver celestial justice. Still, the obsession with omens took real form here. You explore a cramped storage shed where healing scrolls were rumored to have been copied, thin vellum inked with goat blood and black soot, folded precisely 7 times and stored in sheepskin pouches. One scroll contains what looks like a weather chant: wind from north, bite no more, let salt sting instead. It's poetic in a slightly threatening way. Historians still argue whether these incantations were simple folk remedies or genuine attempts at sorcery. Next to the shed, a moss-covered basin cradles rainwater. It's green, vaguely suspicious, and probably not fit for drinking. But locals believed water gathered during a thunderstorm held special power, especially if collected from a sky-facing stone. You consider trying it, then remember your immune system wasn't designed for ancient Nordic trials. You spot a weathered plaque that reads Vi ar Jane San, tried for controlling birds, confessed to nothing. That's the whole thing. No dates. No verdict. Just vibes. Supposedly, Var used carved talismans shaped like fish tails to lure ravens for divination. Notably, he was one of few to walk free after his trial, later moving inland and becoming a carpenter. Unless he turned into a raven. Again, folklore's blurry. Quirky bit? Some trial records include drawings done in charcoal by witnesses, rough sketches showing the accused surrounded by birds. One depicts ravens with runes in their beaks, which historians speculate might represent either truth-telling or just very confused birds. You squint at one sketch etched into a beam in a derelict barn. It's primitive, but unmistakable, a raven perched on a severed hand. No caption, no context, just someone's idea of justice. The barn smells like mildew, old straw, and regret. You exit before you breathe in someone's ancestral trauma. Outside, the wind shifts slightly, like it's reacting to your presence. You glance skyward. A solitary raven circles overhead, slow and deliberate. You don't blink. You don't run. You just nod, and keep walking. You continue inland through ankle-deep moss so spongy it feels like walking on centuries of silent agreement. The land becomes stranger here, low hills shaped like sleeping giants, boulders balanced like dice rolled by gods with a flair for drama. The wind dips suddenly, exchanging its usual howl for a curious stillness, and that's when you spot it, a sheep running in frantic circles, eyes wide, foam at its mouth like a bad latte. No, not a demon sheep, just the opening act of the strange illness that seized this village centuries ago, sparking Iceland's most baffling chain of witchcraft accusations. The sheep weren't just sick, they were violent, breaking fences, charging at shadows. Some claimed their wool crackled with static and that they bleated in Latin. You watch one now, calm but glaring, chewing like it knows too much. When this strange behavior emerged in the early 1600s, villagers panicked, declaring it an unnatural sickness, which is Icelandic code for someone's doing magic and we don't like it. Livestock here isn't just food, it's currency, survival, family even. So when your sheep start acting like caffeinated toddlers with resentment issues, you start looking for scapegoats. That's how a quiet farmhand named Dag Jarder got blamed. His goats were fine. Too fine, apparently. Their calmness was suspicious, like maybe Dag Jarder had whispered spells to protect them. You see the remains of his cottage half swallowed by moss and time, where trial testimony records claim he kept a weather charm under his bed. It was described as a dried fish stitched to sheep fur, soaked in moonlight and sealed with spit. Gross. Historians still argue whether Dagjardir was genuinely believed to be a sorcerer or simply resented for having aesthetically pleasing goats. During his trial, villagers claimed he once muttered to a river and the next day the water reversed its flow. In reality, that might have been seasonal thaw. Or magic. Who's to say? Quirky tidbit: a local folktale describes a sheep that led a child into a ravine and vanished. The child returned claiming the sheep spoke and smelled like rust. That's either supernatural or just Icelandic weather. You pass a corral with old bone fragments scattered under a broken trough. Some are animal. Some might not be. No one checks. You kneel and pick up a shard with runic scratches so faint it could be natural. You squint anyway. The wind whispers again. You stand quickly. The sheep are watching. All of them. Like an ovine jury from a bad farm noir film. You walk faster now, boots sinking into damp soil. The next house you pass has a door painted with salt, a known protective ritual meant to ward off both witchcraft and weird cousins. The paint has faded, but you get the sense it's still working. You don't linger. Ahead, a stream babbles too loudly, gurgling in a rhythm that feels almost chant-like. You stop. Just water. Probably. But somewhere, a bell tolls softly, not from a church, but from a fence post. You approach. Hanging from it is a small pouch, leather, stitched with goat sinew, and marked with a spiral. Inside, ashes. Someone once believed this held healing. Someone else called it cursed. The line between those labels is paper thin out here, especially when sheep start quoting the Latin alphabet. You move inland toward a thicket of leafless birch trees that sway with choreographed unease, their pale trunks carved in places with the same spiral symbols you've seen before, etched not for art, but as quiet warnings. Beneath your feet, the moss is softer now, sponge-like and strangely warm, and then you spot it, a flickering flame far ahead, not from firewood or torch, but something more stubborn, dancing just above the ground like it knows you're watching. Locals call it Snorri's candle, a ghost light said to emerge only in the hours before bad news or unwanted visitors. You follow it, naturally, because curiosity hasn't killed you yet. The flame slips between stones, gliding up the side of a low hill covered in sheep tracks and whatever used to be fences. Then it vanishes in front of a cave mouth barely visible beneath a dangling willow. You kneel and peer into darkness that smells faintly of wet coins and regret. Inside, the walls glitter with something, not treasure, but carvings, thousands of rune fragments, layered and overlapping like graffiti left by generations too afraid to speak aloud. It's here that Snorri Magn's son, a local scribe, once conducted ritual readings, believing that by reciting poems backward under moonlight, he could summon answers to village mysteries. Historians still argue whether Snorri was delusional or just incredibly bored. According to old records, Snorri's trial came after he claimed to have predicted a boat sinking by reading salmon bones. People initially dismissed him, until the boat actually sank. Cue panic. Trial notes say he was interrogated with methods of dampness which likely involved freezing water and prolonged solitude. You shiver just imagining it. Quirky bit: Snorri reportedly owned a raven named Birger who would pluck the correct runes from a bowl when asked to choose truth. Witnesses swore it happened multiple times, though it's entirely possible Birger was just hungry and statistically lucky. You reach deeper into the cave where a large stone slab sits flush against the rear wall, carved in runes and Old Norse prose. One translation reads, "Truth rides light like mist and cuts deep like ice." You sigh, partly because it's profound, and partly because you just stepped in something that smells like decomposed moss and shark. As you exit, the candlelight returns briefly, hovering beside you like a passive-aggressive nightlight. You nod politely. It vanishes again. Outside, the willow branches sway unnaturally in a breeze you don't feel. You glance skyward, not for gods or omens, but just to locate north. The clouds churn faster than you remember. Something's building. You feel it not in your bones, but in the weird sweat forming behind your knee. Nearby, a small plaque reads, "Snorri's cave, do not enter after rain." But it doesn't say why. You smirk, shake off your boots, and continue uphill, where the air smells faintly of burnt herbs and unresolved arguments. You reach the banks of a river that doesn't gurgle, it growls, twisting between boulders with a speed that feels emotional, like the water's trying to escape something you haven't seen yet. The wind has teeth here, biting at your neck like it's personally offended by your jacket choice. You spot a wide stone slab positioned deliberately over the river, carved shallowly with runes and stained faintly pink, as if someone tried and failed to clean off history. This was a site of a particularly cruel ritual known as trial by ice or, more grotesquely, cold drowning. Accused witches were dropped into glacial runoff wearing heavy wool, their survival gauged not by breath but by how quickly they sank or screamed. You edge closer to the slab and notice a bundle of sticks tied with seal sinew hanging from a rusted peg nearby. It sways in rhythm with the river and the ghosts of judgments long expired. The villagers believed the river spoke truth, that ice water stripped away lies. Trial notes speak of a woman named Hala Bjrnsd Tur, who was thrown into the freezing water and survived only to be retried because the judge found her survival unnaturally delayed. Historians still argue whether her endurance was proof of sorcery or the stubborn resilience of someone who just didn't want to freeze to death. You crouch beside the water now, watching it pulse and boil like some ancient creature inhaling under stone lungs. Quirky detail time, some accused were tied to carved stones, each bearing one of the winter runes. These runes supposedly froze emotions, slowed heartbeats, and silenced screams. One account describes a stone inscribed with a spiral that emitted a low hum when submerged. You look for that stone now, half hoping to hear the hum, half hoping you don't. You spot a broken chain wedged into the riverbank, long rusted, trailing into the cold dark like it still remembers wrists. Beside it lies a scorched scroll, half legible, "Let truth sink, and evil rise if reversed, blame the wind." You blink. That scroll makes no sense, and all sense at the same time. The nearby birch trees are silent witnesses, swaying occasionally but not crackling. In some versions of the ritual, the trees were red afterward if they bent toward the river, the accused was guilty. If they bent away, innocent. You squint at one now. It's leaning sideways like it's trying to opt out entirely. You stand again and notice the temperature has dropped not by degrees, but by attitude. The landscape feels passive-aggressive. You pull your coat tighter, stepping away from the slab toward a cluster of rocks once used as seating for trial witnesses. One is carved with a name, Bra, no surname, no context, just Bra. Local lore claims Bra was a little girl who accurately predicted verdicts based on what food she craved. If Bra wanted salted lamb, the witch would hang. If she asked for rye, they'd walk. Historians still argue whether this is pure fiction or a tragic example of how fear outsourced justice to whim. You climb the next ridge as the river fades behind you, its roar replaced by whispering grass and a low groan from the earth, a sound so constant you realize it's the wind again, angry that you survived this section without falling in. You push through a grove of twisted pines whose branches claw at your coat like they're trying to whisper advice you really don't want. The trail leads you to a clearing scattered with barrels and broken tools, remnants of an old fermentation site where locals once brewed a curious concoction that still makes modern Icelanders squirm. It's called rotkafe, a potion of moss, soured milk, and aged shark meat, left to ferment in pits sealed with sheep bladders and crushed herbs. You wrinkle your nose now, and rightly so. Historians claim it smelled like betrayal dipped in foot sweat. This wasn't a dinner dish, it was a rumored charm. Villagers used rot cafe to heal the sick or curse the stubborn, depending on your intentions and how many goats you owned. You pass a basin still half filled with rainwater that bubbles faintly, as if the potion remembers its purpose. An elderly woman named Margaret T. Johns Turr was once accused of witchcraft for making the stuff, after 3 children who drank it developed sudden nosebleeds and reportedly began reciting the names of dead relatives. Historians still argue whether this was side effect or sorcery or just children with overly vivid imaginations and too much fermented moss. You bend to examine an old recipe scrawled onto driftwood nailed to a beam: 1 horn's weight of milk, 2 hands of moss, 3 regrets, stirred with moonshadow. You blink and reread. Definitely not FDA approved. Margaret T's trial took place in a storage barn with no insulation and a heavy draft. Witnesses reported hearing humming from the rafters. When they checked later, they found a pouch of fish bones tied with red thread. Her defense? I was trying to remove sadness. The judge found her guilty of emotional manipulation via unlawful ingredients. You shake your head, partly in disbelief, partly because that's literally the charge. Quirky bit: some villages believed rotten shark could protect against evil spirits, especially if buried beneath door frames and walked over at least once a day. You spot such a frame now warped and low, shaped like a frown. You hesitate, then step across. Your foot tingles. Probably just guilt. Nearby, a stone trough holds bundles of dried herbs and something that looks like fossilized yogurt. A painted stone reads healing or hexing, sometimes same thing. You squint upward at the clouds, which now resemble melted candle wax and smug suspicion. You pass a rack once used for drying roots, every shelf marked with a symbol. One resembles a tooth. Another, a spoon. A third, a question mark. You're not sure whether you're in a pharmacy or a trap. In the distance, sheep bleat unevenly. A raven screeches once sharp, deliberate, and the wind replies with a whistle so shrill you wonder if it's announcing something. You grip your coat tighter, stepping away from the sight as your stomach flips with either mild nausea or metaphysical alert. Ahead, the trail forks in 2. One side lined with turf. One with bones. You flip a coin carved from fish scale. It lands turf side up. You take the left path, and the moss sighs in approval. You climb through a rocky pass where wind whistles with judgmental flair, squeezing between boulders like it's checking pockets for hidden runes. The sky lowers, pressing a soft gray lid onto the landscape, and then, as if summoned by irony itself, you reach a hilltop marked by an engraved stone that reads, "Men accused more often ask why." Unlike continental Europe, where most witch trials targeted women, Iceland was uniquely committed to flipping that ratio. In fact, nearly 90% of those convicted in this region were men. You stare at the carving, mouth slightly open, as history raises its eyebrow. This hill, once used as a gathering site for trials, bore witness to the condemnation of sea captains, farmhands, scribes, even a cheese-maker named Erkur whose goat allegedly glowed in moonlight. Historians still argue why men bore the brunt of suspicion here. One theory is that magic was tied to literacy and say-our knowledge, roles often held by male scholars and poets. Others believe Iceland's tight-knit rural communities placed women in more visible domestic roles, shielding them from certain kinds of scrutiny. You walk across flat stones once used as seating for the magistrates, local judges whose standards fluctuated between Norse mythology and personal inconvenience. One account describes a man tried not for spells or hexes, but for owning too many knives and humming near graves. Quirky bit: one trial listed unnaturally symmetric handwriting as suspicious, suggesting the man had bargained with spirits to improve penmanship. You shake your head, feeling a blend of amusement and concern. A nearby post still holds a rusted hook where accused men were tethered during wind-reading rituals, a process where responses were gauged not by words, but by how your breath carried in the breeze. Breath too still? Guilty. Breath too strong? Also guilty. The only innocent option was apparently sneezing mid-answer, which one man did so forcefully he was acquitted and given a lamb. You step past a cairn of stones thought to mark unconfirmed burials. Each bears a rune and a single letter, perhaps a name fragment, perhaps a warning. Local children dare each other to sleep here during the solstice, claiming the spirits whisper Latin lullabies. You wouldn't know. You never passed Latin. You feel the wind again, lifting hair and memory alike. You squint at the horizon, where a patch of earth glows faintly green moss, or magic. You choose not to touch it, mostly because touching things hasn't gone well so far. Ahead lies a narrow wooden bridge, sagging under the weight of years and probably bad decisions. As you cross, a raven lands nearby and caws once, sharply. You pause. It pauses. Mutual respect. Then it flutters away, leaving you alone with the question posed by the hilltop stone, why men? Why here? Why this? The wind doesn't answer, but it does change direction, gently tugging you toward the next chapter, as if even the breeze agrees you're not done yet. You descend into a narrow valley where fog clings like gossip and every sound seems half swallowed by turf and mist. It's quiet, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that sounds like someone pressed pause on reality while a shadow rewinds in the corner. The path curves toward an abandoned chapel, its roof partially collapsed, its door still marked with runes for protection and truth, although the local ravens apparently didn't get the memo. You step inside cautiously, brushing aside a curtain of cobwebs that smells faintly like sorrow and dried cod. This is where the story of the priest who vanished begins, not figuratively, but literally. Orstian Sigur's son was a young cleric known for his melancholic sermons and unblinking eye contact. Witnesses claimed he would often stop mid-sermon, stare into the rafters, and whisper something unintelligible, prompting shivers and occasional fainting in the first pew. The real scandal surfaced after Orstian accused a fisherman of attempting to curse the church bell using raven feathers and whalebone powder. During the trial, Orstian presented his own evidence, a glowing feather found inside the baptismal font. Historians still argue whether this was authentic or just mold with ambition. The fisherman denied everything. A week later, Orstian disappeared, last seen walking toward the cliffs carrying a book bound in eel skin and muttering about transformation. Some villagers reported seeing a raven land on the church roof that night, caw twice, and fly east followed by an unseasonal gust. And yes, that's where the legend of Raven Priest begins. You peer behind the altar and find a weathered satchel containing scraps of parchment that crackle under your touch. One reads, "Flight is for truth. Truth is above stone. Find me in wing." Another contains a sketch Orstian, or someone with an impeccable jawline, standing beside a raven the size of a small child. Quirky bit, local kids used to leave bread at the chapel door to feed the priest, just in case he returned in feathered form. One year, someone claimed the bread vanished, and 3 sheep on the nearby hill screamed. You walk back outside, where the clouds flicker oddly, like memory glitching. The wind gusts once sharp, specific, and you swear it sounds like a voice clearing its throat. On a nearby rock, a tiny spiral symbol has appeared, fresh and damp, as if etched by Talon. You crouch but don't touch it. You've learned. Above you, a raven circles twice and disappears into mist that feels smarter than you. You let out a breath, unsure whether you're in history or myth anymore. You trace the coastline eastward, where the wind shifts in mood, less accusatory now, more like an aging ant commenting on your posture. The path curls around a deep inlet, its waters black and murmuring with the low reverberation of old lore. This stretch of land, battered by centuries of storm and suspicion, holds a peculiar reputation for blending the divine with the damp. Here, the tradition of Say are Nordic magic rooted in ritual, trance, and communication with spirits once met the rhythms of the sea in a fusion so powerful it blurred the line between religious rite and witchcraft. You descend a slope littered with shells, each one cracked open like a confession. At its base lies a stone circle where rituals took place, 12 rocks arranged with uncanny symmetry, centered around a hollow marked with spirals and ash stains. You step in, carefully, sensing a strange warmth despite the frigid wind. Trial records from this region describe villagers who claim to summon sea spirits, not mermaids with good hair but beings of mist and bone, voices carried on tides, bearing messages or warnings. One woman, Sta Hrefnudtur, said she heard singing in the waves, a chorus of names she didn't know until they appeared carved on her door. Historians still argue whether this was spiritual sensitivity or coincidence tangled in fear. You kneel beside the central hollow and discover fragments of bone smoothed, oddly luminous and wrapped in threads of seaweed that flutter even without wind. Some believe these were offerings to Gur, the sea god, who rewarded respect and punished arrogance with storms so sudden they cracked boats like eggs. Local folklore adds drama. If you see a gull with 5 tail feathers, it's one of Gur's spies. You glance upward. Just 4. You breathe easier. The connection between Say and water extended to healing as well. Charms were placed on stones near waterfalls, invoking protection through rhythmic sound. You find such a stone now, marked faintly with the rune for echo and shaped suspiciously like a sideways face. You whisper into it. Nothing replies, which is comforting and vaguely disappointing. Quirky detail? A trial testimony from a boy named H. Khan who swore he saw a woman walk into the surf and vanish, only to reappear later soaked but smiling, carrying a live fish in her mouth. No one believed him. Except for the fish, presumably. The landscape shifts subtly here, rock giving way to black sand flecked with glass-like chips, remnants of volcanic fury long cooled. You step gently, boots crunching against history, following the coastline to a jagged promontory where wind meets wave with theatrical intensity. You find a cairn built against the cliffside, draped in rotting nets and strewn with feathers, offerings or warnings. A painted wooden board reads "Speak to water, not through it." You don't know what it means, but it feels profound, like a fortune cookie that's been soaked in ancient doubt. You sit for a moment, letting the sea speak in hushes and hisses. The wind wraps around your ears, almost tender now, almost apologetic. You watch a wave crash and recede, and in its foam, you swear you see runes trying to hold their shape, just for a second. You climb a stony ridge pocked with old fence posts, some snapped in half like they lost arguments with time, others still upright but weighed down by tufts of wool and salt. The village beyond is scattered, not planned, not tidy, just homes placed where they wouldn't fall off cliffs or flood on a moody Tuesday. You pass one such home with a door smeared in sheep fat, which was believed to repel evil, not metaphorically, but literally. Evil couldn't abide the smell, apparently. Trial transcripts here begin to blur literally and figuratively. The ink ran, the pages smudged, and witness accounts twisted depending on who had a grudge, who missed lunch, or who just wanted attention. You arrive at the site of one infamous trial, marked by a boulder shaped like a sideways heart, where 3 villagers gave sworn testimony. And then changed their stories 5 times. The accused was Svanr, a quiet man who carved toys from driftwood and apparently smiled too much. One neighbor claimed he sent dreams to her cat, which made the cat hiss in Latin. Another neighbor swore he saw Svanr levitate but later admitted he'd been drunk and standing downhill. Historians still argue whether this was mass hysteria or a community overexposed to fermented shark. Quirky bit, one witness insisted Svanr used smiling magic, a supposed hex that warmed people's hearts right before bankrupting them emotionally. Svanr denied everything, offering only a poem about wind and fish. The judge found this evasive. You crouch by the boulder and notice faded carving spirals again, but this time intersected by crooked lines and dots like stars. Someone tried to make a map here, or a warning. You get up quickly. Nearby, a turf-roofed barn still stands, tilting slightly but defiant. Inside, on one support beam, are the words, "He spoke to her shadow, not her face." No context. Just ink and unease. You examine the barn's floor, which dips weirdly in one spot. Beneath it, trial notes were said to be buried after being deemed nonconforming to truth. Translation: inconvenient. Several testimonies were about dreams, voices carried by ravens, and one accused man who claimed he could taste lies like pepper. The magistrate dismissed that as gustatory arrogance. You watch wind roll across the field, picking up loose grass and one oddly symmetrical feather. Ravens don't shed like that normally. Or maybe they do. You don't Google it. You just let the wind carry the truth away, or whatever version survived the village's rewrite. After all, eyewitness accounts were less about evidence, more about tone, bias, and whether the listener already believed. You pass a field where crops never grow. Locals say it's cursed by misremembering. That feels real enough. You drift deeper into the heart of a village flattened by time and trimmed with fences meant more for decoration than defense. The wind kicks up again, less elegant now, more like it's throwing a tantrum in every direction. A low stone building hunches beside a barren slope, its roof stitched with old netting and turf, and the door swings loosely like it's unsure whether to welcome you or warn you off. Inside, it's dark. Not scary dark, just heavy, the kind of dark that's shaped by things said in a whisper and then regretted. This was once the site of storm interrogations. Not formal trials, but sessions held during wild weather under the belief that lightning clarified truth and wind stripped away deceit. You walk the perimeter, boots brushing the dust of 1,000 unfinished prayers. A woman named Gu Bjrg Svane's Tur was tried here during a thunderstorm so violent it collapsed a chimney mid-accusation. Witnesses claimed she laughed throughout the session, a sound described as hollow as sea caves and twice as rude. Historians still argue whether this laughter was defiance or madness, or perhaps the first auditory symptom of a folk illness they didn't understand. Records say Gu Bjrg was asked to recite prayers backward and to breathe with the wind. Her failure to comply allegedly caused the rain to intensify. The judge took this as guilt. You exhale slowly, picturing a courtroom drowned by thunder and screams. Quirky bit: Gu Bjrg once crafted charms from butter and bone, tiny sculptures said to warm cold hearts and soften clenched judgment. One was found buried beneath her interrogation seat, shaped like a weeping eye. You spot a replica now, displayed behind glass with a note, mildly cursed, but sweet. The room smells of damp wool, old wood, and that subtle unease you get when your left knee twitches for no reason. A journal sits open on a sloped desk, weathered and stained, its ink squirming across the page like it never wanted to settle. One line reads, "Truth screamed too loudly is often mistaken for storm." Another simply says, "I am still not wet." You walk outside into a gust so sudden it steals the warmth from your chest and tosses your thoughts into disarray. On the slope above, stones have been arranged into a spiral, a mirror of the butter charms, this one big enough to stand inside. Local kids call it the laughing ring. They say if you stand there during a storm and don't blink, you'll hear Gu Bjrg's laugh and be unable to lie for a week. You try it. Wind slices past your ears, rain begins to spit, and something, maybe the earth, maybe your own stubborn heartbeat, chuckles just faintly. You blink. You always blink. Not cursed. Probably. You descend the slope as the storm shifts again, muttering toward the mountains and taking your moment with it. Above, a raven doesn't fly, it hovers. You don't wave. You follow a winding path uphill where the wind has begun to feel theatrical, shaking grasses like a bad actor insisting on a dramatic entrance. Ahead looms a flat outcrop, its stone cracked and veined with moss, the surface polished smooth from centuries of deliberation and doom. This is the Law Rock, a sacred site where Icelandic lawmen once gathered to read aloud statutes and sometimes, to deliver verdicts that didn't bother with second chances. You climb slowly, boots slipping slightly on dew-soaked lichen, until you reach the summit. There's no ceremony now, just silence and the occasional raven squawk, which feels more editorial than accidental. This particular Law Rock became infamous for one final witch trial, a dramatic send-off to an era soaked in superstition and soggy parchment. The accused was J. Cull Einarsson, a traveling tradesman who sold charms shaped like shells and spoke in couplets. His trial notes read like poetry, he sang to bread, and it rose too proud, he carved fish, and they blinked. Not exactly damning, but weird enough for the magistrate to schedule a judgment by wind. Historians still argue whether J. Cull was truly magical or just wildly misunderstood by a population with zero tolerance for rhyming merchants. The trial took place as the wind roared and officials demanded he stand atop the Law Rock without flinching for an entire hour. The belief was that guilt stirred the air, that innocence walked still while nature raged around it. J. Cull stood, eyes closed, chanting softly, and when the hour was up, the wind ceased completely. Locals panicked, interpreting the silence as unnatural. His sentence was immediate: exile across the sea and forfeiture of all charms. Quirky bit? Some villagers believed J. Cull's charms returned independently over time, tiny shell-shaped sculptures found buried in bread ovens or tucked beneath pillows without explanation. You walk now to the edge of the Law Rock, overlooking a valley spread wide and wild. Below, sheep graze without irony, unaware they were once part of evidence and maybe a jury. You crouch and find a chipped rune etched faintly on the stone, a spiral intersected by a teardrop, perhaps a warning or perhaps just weathered graffiti. You don't touch it. You've learned. The wind circles once, not in anger this time, but in curiosity. You feel a shift not in weather, but in weight. The kind of stillness that settles only after something irreversible. You step back from the rock, casting one final glance at the spot where verdicts were spoken aloud to no one in particular, trusting the wind to carry them, twist them, and return them as echoes too faint to question. You make your way into a village where smoke drifts sideways like it's trying to dodge something, and everything smells faintly scorched, as if yesterday burned and nobody cleaned up. The scent leads you to a ring of old clay kilns, some intact, some blown apart like angry bread ovens that had too much ambition. These kilns once fired pottery for trade and ritual, including small charms shaped like wolves, fish, and eyes, which villagers hung above their beds or tucked into lamb satchels for good luck or mild intimidation. One day, without warning, 3 kilns exploded simultaneously, blasting shards into the sky and setting fire to a nearby storage barn filled with dried seaweed and secrets. Panic took root. Was it sabotage? Sorcery? Bad masonry? Trial records say the timing coincided with a local girl named Brynja falling ill after dreaming of a woman with flaming hands. Naturally, her uncle accused the neighbor of summoning heat spirits. Quirky bit, that neighbor, H.J. Ritter the tile maker, had recently painted 3 kiln tiles with the rune for truth. All 3 were found shattered in precisely 7 fragments, a numerical symbol of imbalance in Icelandic folklore. Historians still argue whether the explosions were divine anger or just physics having a tantrum. You examine one kiln, its edges scorched and fused, and you spot melted pottery with spiral designs warped like overcooked truths. Nearby, a journal entry sits behind glass, preserved from soot. The oven sang, and we should have listened. You don't hear any singing, but the wind does whistle oddly, bouncing between kiln mouths like it's checking each for gossip. A child's drawing, faded on the wall of a nearby home, shows kills with smiling faces, arms raised. Either friendly ovens or terrifying emoji. You step into the charred barn ruins where salt clumps against the walls in strange patterns. One patch resembles a seal, another, a question mark. A raven screeches. You spin slowly, realizing the wind smells different here, sharper, like secrets picked up mid-flight. You find a clay charm shaped like a horn tucked under a beam, its surface inscribed with crooked letters that might be names or just someone's bad attempt at spelling. You leave it be. Stepping out into sunlight that feels filtered through a stranger's memory, you glance back once. The kills remain silent, but your breath fogs briefly, as if heat remembered you. You drift into the edge of another hamlet stitched loosely into the hillside, where turf homes tuck themselves like secrets and sheep horns hang from every doorframe, not decorative, but protective. These charms, crafted from salt-crusted silver and bones shaped into spirals or question marks, straddled the line between medicine and mischief. You pass one doorway where a charm dangles on frayed twine, shaped like a smiling fish with mismatched eyes. Supposedly it cures coughs and discourages nosy neighbors. You duck under it and move into what was once a healer's cottage, its floor worn smooth by countless feet desperate for relief, its shelves sagging with bundles of dried moss, jawbones, and shards of quartz said to absorb negative intent. A trial held here accused a woman named Colbert of ambiguous healing, a charge brought against her after someone recovered from illness but then claimed their dreams were too vivid. Colbert mixed her cures with ritual, salt circles, sheep horn powder, and water blessed under the northern lights. Historians still argue whether her treatments were spiritual rebellion or just really enthusiastic gardening. Her charms gained notoriety, especially one called the Hope Coil, a thin strand of copper wound around bone and set with red stone. One version allegedly glowed when lies were nearby, another version may have just been slightly radioactive. You spot a replica now resting in a wooden tray marked mostly safe. Quirky bit, Colbert once offered diagnosis through bone cracking, where she listened to sheep ribs bend in firelight and divined ailments by the pitch. Local lore says she saved a child from death by feeding them moss soaked in fermented laughter, though you've yet to find a recipe for that. You find a journal hidden beneath a crooked plank floor, wrapped in lambskin and tied with silver wire. Its pages read, her potions sang. Her charms blinked. The wind waited. You look around, and the air does feel paused, like it's watching you take notes. You exit cautiously, crossing into a field where charms still hang from fence posts, some shaped like stars, others like question marks with teeth. One charm spins slowly, though no wind pushes it. You don't ask. You just step back, boots brushing grass too soft for coincidence, and whisper a quiet apology to any lingering moss with opinions. You crest a ridge where the wind has quieted into nervous breathing, and the sky, usually so moody in Iceland, has gone strangely theatrical. Overhead, clouds churn crimson, soft tendrils unfurling like the curtain call of some celestial drama. Locals call this phenomenon blood aurora, though scientists prefer red-tinted aurora borealis caused by low-altitude oxygen excitation. Either way, it's unsettling. You squint upward and the color deepens, glimmering against the silhouette of a crumbling watchtower. This very spot sparked one of the region's strangest panics, a full-fledged hysteria after red lights hovered above the village for 3 nights in a row, causing sheep to scatter, bread to flatten, and prayers to get suspiciously louder. A farmer named Einar claimed the lights spelled out runes he couldn't read but definitely didn't trust. Trial notes say that following the third Aurora night, 6 people were accused of welcoming spirits too eagerly, whatever that means. One woman, Arna, was arrested simply for lighting 3 candles and whistling, all while standing under the red sky. Historians still argue whether the event was exaggerated or tied to actual solar activity, but for the villagers, it was supernatural enough to order a communal fast and bury all their copper charms. You pass one burial site, now a ring of stone surrounding a hollow, inside which sit small metallic spirals, rusted smooth by time and collective fear. Quirky bit, one charm unearthed years later supposedly whispered the wind knows when held up during a storm. You reach a cliff edge where flat stones have been arranged like steps, each etched with symbols hinting at protection, invitation, or passive-aggressive avoidance. Some villagers believed the red auroras were warnings from sky spirits that Iceland's trials had gone too far, that punishing people for conversation and candle use might upset cosmic balance. You crouch beside a marker labeled Aurora Shrine, a broken slab painted with streaks of red pigment and set between feathers and quartz. Nearby, you spot what appears to be a mirror fragment embedded into a sheep horn, the kind of charm used to reflect false memories. You don't touch it. You just stare, watching the red sky pulse once more as the sun dips low, and the wind finally sighs like someone closing a book too heavy to keep open. You leave the cliff slowly, stepping over runes whose meanings were never agreed upon. The lights fade behind you. But you swear, just before they disappear, they blink once and spell something you almost recognize. You walk inland into the heart of a hamlet stitched together by turf houses whose roofs blend into the hillside like secrets refusing to be told. The walls bulge softly, breathing with age, and as you pass each one, you feel the weight of silence ancient, pressed deep into peat and shadow. You find yourself drawn to one particularly sunken house, its doorway framed by sheep horns and a faded sign that reads "No fire without permission." Inside, the air is warm and thick with the scent of old herbs and something faintly metallic. You squint, adjusting to the gloom, and then you see them etched into the inside walls, hundreds of tiny carvings like fingerprint-sized sigils. Spirals, forks, stars, eyes, mouths that open wider than proportion allows. These weren't decorative. They were warnings, charms, or stories too potent for words. One wall bears a massive carving, a spiral within a spiral, crossed through with an angular line and a question mark. Scholars believe this may have signified the unseen judgment, or possibly just meant "do not touch." You do not touch. Trial records mention this house often. It was home to Jnas, a reclusive craftsman who claimed he could trap ill intent inside symbols. He would carve runes into bits of sheep horn and embed them into turf, whispering over each one. When children in the village grew sick, some accused him of causing it. Others thanked him when they recovered. Historians still argue whether Jnas was a mad genius or simply too meticulous for his own safety. You step deeper into the house and find a bench carved with birds' ravens, but stylized, with swirling tails and open beaks. Beside the bench lies a scroll wrapped in seaweed. Quirky bit, Jnas was known to leave wall warnings, runes with built-in self-erasure. If not properly read, they'd fade or migrate overnight. One visitor claimed a symbol followed her from wall to wall, rearranging itself until it resembled her name backwards. You examine a rune near the ceiling, shaped like an eye in a storm. It shimmers faintly, but that might be your nerves. Beneath your feet, the floor creaks with purpose. You step back. The air feels heavier now, as if someone sighed 3 centuries ago and never stopped. Outside, the wind picks up, fluttering a bit of curtain etched with red spirals. You glance once more at the carvings, wondering which were for protection, and which were just personal diary entries in the language of caution. You exit the turf house slowly, letting the door swing halfway closed like it knows something you don't. The wind hums. You hum back. You climb toward a ridge where the rocks cluster like judgmental elders and the trail narrows enough to make you wonder if you've wandered into a metaphor. The air thins slightly, not due to altitude but attitude, like something unseen just raised a brow at your presence. Ahead, nestled into the crook of 2 cliffs, sits the remains of an old trial station, half cottage, half shrine, and fully confusing. This site once hosted some of the strangest verdicts in Iceland's witch-hunting history, where judges prided themselves not on law, but on intuition, dream analysis, and sometimes just the volume of seagull complaints. You step inside, and the scent hits peat smoke and pressed flowers, mingling awkwardly with the lingering breath of disappointment. One magistrate, Steph N. T. Mossarson, believed trolls meddled in court outcomes. Trial notes say he adjusted verdicts based on troll proximity, once acquitting a man solely because his sheep refused to cross a stream. Historians still argue whether this was superstitious nonsense or a flawed but sincere attempt to respect local folklore. You peer into an alcove where charms hang from nails, salt bundles, raven feathers, one sheep hoof tied with copper string. Supposedly, these were given to judges to enhance perception, which you interpret as magical bribery. One verdict reads, "The accused breathed rhythmically, sentence suspended." Another, "He wore moss respectfully, acquitted." You shake your head slowly. Quirky bit? A magistrate once claimed a trial outcome was swayed by a thunderclap heard mid-cross-examination. No one else heard it. He insisted it was divine feedback. The accused was told to clap once weekly in gratitude. You exit the building and find the judgment cairn, a circular pile of flat stones, each inscribed with verdicts too cryptic to be helpful. Bone too heavy. Guilt probable. Eye contact strong. Soul unclear. You kneel and read one aloud. The wind shifts, just slightly. A raven screeches above and you swear it sounds sarcastic. The landscape here wears its ambiguity proudly. Law mingled with myth, evidence swayed by weather and wool texture. You find a plaque nailed to a nearby tree, "Justice sometimes prefers poetry." You smile, unsure whether to laugh or take it personally. Behind the plaque, a spiral etched deep glows faintly. You don't touch it. You nod respectfully. The wind agrees, nudging you toward the path ahead, which curves like a question waiting for its own answer. You step carefully along a winding lane lined with sleeping turf homes and sharp silence, the kind that doesn't suggest peace but rather expectation. The village feels like it's waiting for memory, for echo, for someone to ask the right question. Here begins the saga of Helga Odstur, one of the most controversial figures in Iceland's trial folklore. Her house still stands, albeit lopsided and moss-cloaked, framed by stone carvings that seem too deliberate for weathering. You duck inside where the air hangs heavy with history and the faint tang of smoked herbs, and you see them, hanging charms shaped like human ears, stitched from lamb hide and copper thread. They were Helga's trademark, said to help you hear what hides. She was a woman of conviction, intelligent, blunt, and allegedly capable of reading thoughts through the rhythm of breath. Her accusers called it manipulation, she called it compassion. When a magistrate asked her to beg for mercy during her trial, she famously said, "Mercy should not be begged. It should be baked." Historians still argue what she meant. Some say it was metaphor, others say she might have been hungry. The trial was messy. Witnesses claimed she made salt hiss, charms glow, and once held a sheep so long it stopped aging. Quirky bit, one charm Helga kept under her bed was nicknamed the Silent Spoon, a whittled horn wrapped in wool that pulsed gently when held by angry people. No one knows how it worked, if it worked, or whether it just gave folks something to stare at while fuming. You find a small book behind a broken shelf, wrapped in raven feathers and sealed with a clove sprig. Inside, riddles and recipes, one of which reads, "A charm for truth, mix honey, breath, and disappointment. Bake until forgiven." You close it slowly, hands tingling. The turf walls around you murmur, a trick of wind and grass, or maybe memory flexing. You step back into daylight where clouds swirl tighter, and the ground hums beneath your boots. Helga never confessed, never begged, and never truly vanished. Her grave remains unmarked. But the villagers say she left her voice in the wind. You hear it now, a chuckle, warm and stubborn. You follow a winding trail shaped like a question and paved with memories that don't want to be found. The air grows sharp, brined with ocean sorrow and something scorched. This is the path to where the ashes were left behind, not in urns or tidy hearths, but scattered across forgotten fields where justice sparked, then fizzled out. You arrive at a hill carved by wind and accidental fire, where charred wood lies half buried in moss, its edges blackened, yet untouched by rot. Villagers once believed certain flames weren't natural heat with motive, fire that lingered beyond fuel. They told stories of ovens igniting without touch, of blankets curling into embers mid-sleep. Trial records point to a family home struck by unearthly heat, which led to suspicions against a woman named Dane, who was said to talk to her sheep in a language that made them nap suspiciously fast. Dane denied witchcraft but admitted she knew how to warm sadness. The magistrate deemed it conceptually vague and therefore incriminating. Historians still argue whether her confession, never clear, never complete, was desperation or a poetic curse. Quirky bit: one child claimed the fire began from a stone that hummed like laughter held too long. The stone was never found. You crouch at the edge of a burned scar where flowers grow in patterns too symmetrical for coincidence, yellow spirals alternating with red hearts, a gardening mystery or magical message. You touch one cautiously. It vibrates ever so slightly. Beneath the soil, buried but not gone, lie fragments of scorched paper, pages believed to be from charm books, healing chants, and coded prayers written in spiral verse. The wind whips past as you uncover one, its ink faded, but legible enough to read: let warmth rise, let grief cool, let wind decide what memory burns. You stand slowly, brushing ash from your sleeve as if history tried to hold you. Ravens circle overhead without haste, just watching, like ushers in a theater where every act is a verdict. You walk on, tracking scorched lines that twist like a forgotten narrative, and you realize, what wasn't buried still speaks. The field hums quietly with heat that isn't visible but insists it was right. You enter a hollow in the hills where the mist dips low like it's tired of floating and the wind softens to something more thoughtful, brushing your cheeks like it's deciding whether or not to trust you. This is where doubt settled thickest, not just among villagers, but within the trials themselves. The question loomed: were the accused truly wielding magic, or was something deeper at play, something within the mind? You pass a patch of grass growing in spiral patterns, uncanny yet elegant, and approach the remnants of a cottage where a young man named Leifer was tried for dream casting. He claimed he could pull thoughts from others while asleep and send gentle suggestions back. His neighbors accused him after one started reciting prayers she'd never learned. The magistrate, who reportedly feared mirrors, found this unsettling. Trial records describe Leifer's confessions as fragmented, poetic, and prone to metaphor. One entry simply reads, "I caught silence in my teeth and spat it back as rain." Historians still argue whether Leifer's abilities were supernatural or a symptom of mental illness rarely understood at the time. You step into the remains of his home, a single wall with faded runes carved into the interior, all spiraling inward to a center marked by what looks like a cracked bowl. Nearby, a stone bears faint carvings of eyes closed, symbols for sleep and perception braided around a spiral. Quirky bit: local children claimed the house would change shape depending on who approached, shrink for guilt, expand for kindness. You glance around now. It's perfectly average-sized. Maybe you're neutral. The tension between magic and misunderstood minds was never fully resolved in these villages. Another case, that of a woman named Sigren, involved compulsive chanting, herbal rituals, and intricate paintings made entirely from sheep's milk and frustration. Some villagers revered her, others feared her. During her trial, she insisted the herbs sang back. No one knew what to do with that. You pass a field marked by posts topped with carvings of brains, yes, actual brain shapes, etched into stone to represent interior storms. You chuckle softly, but the wind replies with a sigh. A scroll hangs from one such post, wrapped in spider silk and inked with dense spirals. You don't unravel it, partly because it looks fragile, partly because some truths are meant to hum, not shout. You walk on past these symbols of blurred diagnoses and debates still echoing mental illness, spiritual sensitivity, and the human desire to make sense of what flickers inside when the world doesn't quite match the mind. The hill murmurs. You nod quietly. There's no verdict here, just shadows in spiral form. You head toward the edge of town where the terrain tilts strangely flat one moment, then rippling like someone forgot to finish flattening the earth. This is where the records were meant to live, bound in leather and tucked into boxes sealed with wax and worry. But they don't. The village's archive, which once held trial transcripts, ruined sketches, and confessions written in spiraled verse, simply vanished. Not burned. Not stolen in one dramatic midnight heist. Just missing. You approach the old record hall, now a collapsed frame wrapped in turf and indifference. The air feels slightly offended, as if history itself is muttering, "I was here." The remaining shelves are blank, dust-coated, and lined with shapes where documents used to sit, ghost shadows of parchment. Trial logs that accused neighbors of wind betrayal and thought echoing are now nowhere to be found. Historians still argue whether this disappearance was accidental, deliberate, or the result of a slow erosion called collective forgetfulness. Inside the ruins, you find a tiny scroll tucked behind a stone beam. It's blank, save for a spiral and the word return. Quirky bit, locals once believed that if a page was written with unjust ink, that is, ink made from bitter berries and spilled secrets, it would erase itself within 50 winters. You glance around, wondering how bitter those berries truly were. You cross a stream where trial confessions were said to be read aloud and then dunked underwater to test resilience. The stream now babbles indifferently. A slab beside it reads, "Truth breathes best when dry." Someone's idea of poetic closure, maybe. Beneath your feet, runes carved into stepping stones fade faster than you can read them. You pause to trace one, but it crumbles slightly, as if the language got tired. You find a sheepskin pouch stuffed with ashes and dried fern, labeled "Memories of Wind." Inside, nothing, not even scent. Just space. You exhale slowly. Maybe that's all history really needs sometimes. Space. You exit the ruins and spot a raven perched on a crooked frame beam. It caws once, drops a feather, and flies off. You pick up the feather. It's unnaturally soft, like it's never been used to write anything cruel. You tuck it away, just in case the archives ever feel like returning. You move through the quiet streets of a coastal town that doesn't advertise its history, but wears it loosely, like a scarf knitted from whispers. Signs are modest, paint fading on plaques that sit just below the eye line, like they don't want you to notice until you're ready. This is where modern Iceland remembers, not in tourist gloss or theatrical reenactments, but in delicate nods to stories that still stir when the wind insists. You pass a modest museum fronted by a raven carving so detailed you'd swear it blinks when the clouds shift. Inside, no neon signs, just soft lighting over fragments, trial scrolls, broken charms, bundles of herbs stored in shadow box frames. A docent nods and hands you a pamphlet, which reads, "To remember is not to accuse. To name is not to condemn." You walk slowly through the exhibits. One section holds stones with spiral carvings, attributed to unknown accused. Another showcases letters written by descendants, expressing sorrow, anger, wonder. Quirky bit, a popular exhibit features a sheep-shaped charm labeled "The Witness," carved from driftwood and bearing 7 spirals. When pressed gently, it bleats faintly, a reconstructed sound based on archival guesses. You chuckle, but also feel weirdly seen. Outside, you stroll into a town square where 5 stones form a subtle star pattern. No plaque explains it, but locals say it was once used in solstice remembrance ceremonies, where villagers whispered the names of those lost to trials and released feathers into the air. You find a bench beside one stone inscribed with a single word, still. Tour guides rarely mention it. The wind does. You sit and feel the texture of memory around you, not oppressive, but tender, like folklore tugging your sleeve. A raven lands nearby, not for drama, just for presence. It doesn't speak. It doesn't need to. In this village, stories breathe quietly, stitched into the sea breeze and layered between footprints and moss. You rise. The raven stays. You walk away knowing nothing here is gone, only quieter. You follow the shoreline now, where the land kisses the ocean not with romance, but with resignation. Pebbles scatter underfoot like forgotten punctuation. The waves roll in rhythm that doesn't match the wind, and that's the first signal, something is whispering, but not from above. Ahead lies the final outpost, a stone archway facing the sea, carved with spirals and narrow lines that almost look like feathers. No house. No shrine. Just the arch. Locals call it the listening gate. Tradition says if you pass through it at dusk, you'll hear truths not meant for daylight. You step under and pause, letting salt and silence fold around you. The wind holds back. The gulls hush. You hear something, not words, but suggestion. A pull. A pause. A memory half-shaped. Here, accused souls were believed to gather on the wind, not to haunt, but to observe, to mark those who listen deeply. Trial records end here. No final verdict. No last confession. Just a list of names no one agrees on. One is etched faintly into the stone base, J Na, twice underlined, then smudged. Quirky bit, some claim if you whisper your name here, the sea responds differently next time you visit. You don't test it, but you consider it. You stand quietly for a moment longer, the arch at your back and the horizon stitched with mist. Beneath you, the rocks are warm barely, but enough to feel like the earth is still paying attention. A raven passes once, too low for ceremony, too fast for symbolism. Just present. Like everything here. You walk away from the gate, not hurried, not hesitant. Just fuller, as if every spiral, storm, charm, and whisper shaped something in you that won't fade. The wind brushes your shoulder, not pushing, not pulling. Just reminding you that memory is a place, and you've walked it now, fully. You wander inland one last time, where the ground folds gently and the sky seems to stretch with relief. The breeze slows, not dead, just deliberate, carrying the hush of stories spent. This final path isn't marked by spirals or symbols but by stones arranged into irregular sentences, as though someone tried to write history in gravel. You step carefully between them. Each stone bears a word, some names, some emotions, some things like if and despite. It's a grammar of memory, laid out by hands who never learned punctuation but knew everything about silence. At the heart of the arrangement sits a bench carved from driftwood and sheepbone, lined with charcoal sketches of ravens, wind, and a flame curled into a question mark. You sit not from fatigue but reverence. This was known as the listening seat, a resting place for anyone who walked the trial roads and left unchanged. Local folklore says sitting here tunes you briefly to the wind's long memory. You don't hear whispers. You feel a weight ease slightly, as though doubt took one step back. Beneath the bench is a plaque, weathered almost smooth, that reads, "To walk is to wonder. To wonder is to soften." Quirky bit, sometimes people return weeks later and find feathers tucked in the bench cracks. No one admits to placing them. You rise slowly, taking a final look across the fields, hills, and homes folded into the landscape like breath held long and released quietly. Ravens circle above, not dramatically. Just like punctuation in a language that never needed grammar. The path ends here not because there's no more to learn, but because some stories don't finish. They linger, spiral, settle, and wait for the next breeze to carry them forward. As dusk drapes itself over mossy hills and raven-swept skies, you take one last breath beneath Iceland's whispering wind, a breath that carries the memory of spiral-carved stones, salt charms strung across doorways, and truths coaxed from fire and fog. You've walked not just through villages and valleys, but through centuries shaped by whispers, beliefs, and the uncertain magic stitched inside every accusation. The sheep, the gulls, the wind itself, they judged, they listened, they forgave. Now the stories have settled into your coat seams and the pause behind your thoughts. You sit once more just briefly on the listening bench beneath skies dimming into velvet. A raven circles, not as witness, but punctuation. The echoes grow softer. The spirals fade. Iceland releases you gently, like a tale that no longer needs retelling but remains etched somewhere quiet. You feel something shift, not clarity exactly, but weight redistributed. The wind hums once and then moves on. And you? You rise not haunted, not burdened but threaded with history, human, fragile, poetic. A little wind-marked. A little braver. You walked the edge of belief and found warmth hidden inside old frost. The last feather falls. The path closes. And you carry the silence forward like truth that never shouted.